Well, let me just begin by saying that I don't worry about Genesis. Genesis, as you may know from the wider world, seems to evoke despair and controversy. Because is it literally true, every word? Well, that's not generally how we read the Bible here, because people in that time had no concept of literally true. Or is it just an old story that has nothing to tell us? Well, I doubt that too. I'm kind of in the middle. I like this story. I think it's got some great images in it. It really awakens your imagination. It's a story that has been read in many ways. And one of the things I was thinking about this week is as modern people, we tend to read it as scientists. And we kind of expect it to be a scientific explanation. And it is not. It isn't a scientific explanation, never was. It's a theological explanation showing a particular understanding of God and God's capacities. It's part of what led to science itself, though, because there was a tradition in Christianity this was the book that you went to first if you wanted to know something. And then as science emerged in the 16th, 17th centuries, there was this idea in Europe, at least, that the earth, all the things on earth, were also God's book. And so when you were studying nature, you were studying what God had created. And there was a corollary that they had that said, there can't be any disagreement with what's on earth and what's in the book. Well, as modern people, we understand that our understandings change over time. I was thinking about that this week, how a few hundred years ago, Descartes proclaimed that only humans have a soul, a spirit, and that there was a distinct separation between body and spirit. And that because animals didn't have a soul, they had no feelings or emotions or perceptions or feeling of pain. And that, unfortunately, held true in the scientific view for several hundred years. Scientists today won't claim that. We know far better than to believe that. But similarly, when we read Genesis, we read it as their understanding at that time. The way we think about the Big Bang now, the way we think about evolution, these things will change. I rather doubt that evolution will ever be put aside as a concept and a theory, but we understand it better and better as the years go by. So I read the passage and all of Genesis 1 as someone who was trained in evolutionary biology. And so I'm not going to make any claims about this being a literal truth or that this is exactly how things happened. One thing about this passage is that the language is what you could call sparse. It would not pass for a scientific paper. There's no record of who observed. There's no record of the method of observation. There's no double-blind study. It's a beautiful story. And it's also trying to show us what is the human place in the world. I'm going to get into that later. And we just have to remember not to bring our own assumptions about knowledge, about how to read a text, about what is true and what is not true, even about this idea of literal truth. We have to remember that those are presuppositions that we're not part of the world 3,000 years ago, or 2,500 years ago when this story was written down. But unfortunately, that view influences translations. There's a couple of problems historically with reading Genesis, because the Bible isn't just a religious document. The writer was giving his own understanding and observations, and he was constructing a way to look at the world. And in the recent years, liberal theologians have tried to bend over backwards to let science be the word and to try to interpret this according to science. And if that doesn't work, then just say, well, the Bible is just about religion or myth. It's not about the physical world, they might say. Now, we can't go back and interview the ancient Israelites. The ancient context, the historical, literary, cultural, cosmological concept, the people who first heard this passage. It's possible that we kind of congratulate ourselves today and imagine our superiority to these people, kind of patronize their alleged ignorance or primitive naivete. There's ancient cosmologies and different versions of them, widely shared, though with slight variations, across that whole ancient Near East, the region Sumer, Babylon, Egypt. But I don't worry about that particular cosmology. Some people have tried to reconstruct it from gathering pieces from here and there and everywhere. We don't quite see that ancient cosmology that says there's a flat disk held up by pillars surrounded by water. We don't see that, at least in this passage. We can read it in part as actual description. So it says, for example, a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. This is in verse 1 or 2. Ruach Elohim. It's often translated spirit, not wind. And that started with the King James Version, who were joining in on that Cartesian body, spirit, soul, matter separation, and introducing this idea of God as spirit where it never was before. In the Hebrew scriptures, this word ruach is always physical and material, and it always refers either to the winds of the atmosphere or to the breath of animate beings. So it probably means winds here, but since God is speaking, it could even mean breath. But a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Now, is the sky a solid dome? That's how some people try to say that people imagined it was a solid dome. But if we understand this passage as describing not a theory, but as of perception, of what people perceived, it could be perceived as a dome. Think about it when you've been out. Is there not a feeling that the sky is up there and then it comes down around us? And is it a solid dome holding waters up there and then a door opens and the rain falls down? Well, I think we could expect the Israelites had some knowledge of rain. There are many passages in the Bible that have rain coming from clouds. In fact, it usually does. And other materials from the region, the same. Sure, sometimes it comes from heaven. The word we translate heaven is also translated sky. Or sometimes in poetry, you'll get a passage like, the heavens dropped, yes, the clouds dropped water. So in Hebrew poetry, there's often a parallelism, means the same thing twice. So this is saying the heavens hold the clouds. Now, if the heavens are shut or the heavens are open, it's an image, but it's not referring to a door in a purported dome. The Israelite people were interested in what affected their lives. They were very practical people. And they understood rain. They understood the seasons. They understood that in some seasons it would rain and some it would very likely not. They knew that a rain could come and could go. It might not even rain when there was a cloud. So this idea of water held above a dome, this is not from ordinary experience, but when we try to say that that's what they thought, then we're sort of making up a sort of quasi-scientific theory for them, which we have no record for. Now, as to plants, on the third day, God introduced the plants. Well, we've got some translation problems here, because the words in Hebrew, what our text as translated says, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind that bear fruit with the seed in it. Now, the word that's translated vegetation here would better be plants, green plants. Plants yielding seed. The word there that was translated plants there would really be best translated as grains. So grains yielding seed. And then, of course, the fruit trees that bear fruit with the seed in it. And think about botanists today. We divide those two kinds of plants as quite separate as well. We think of monocots, which grains and grasses fall into that category. These are plants that, in general, their seeds are shown on a stalk. They're not inside a fruit. Think of your irises when they go to seed, right? You can see the seed right there. And there are dicots, things like fruit trees that have a seed that's enclosed. So already here we're seeing some actual taxonomy, that this writer understood that these were distinctly different kinds of plants. And then, of course, this light, God created light at the beginning, and then not until after the plants did the sun and moon show up in the sky. And, well, we know that plants don't grow without light. They need the light for photosynthesis. But this is, of course, not an observation. This is a wondering. It's supposition. So I think it's fine that we update our understanding of what is there in the text and let go of whatever we think is there that is not there and enjoy it as an expression of delight and awe in the natural world. Because God kept saying, or it kept saying that God saw that it was good. So one of the disadvantages of how the passage has been translated over recent years is that it makes the passage much more human-centered than it really is. In this passage, we see the introduction of up to plants, and next week we'll hear about all the animate beings. If we're going to draw on Scripture for our understanding, I think we need to go to not a literal reading but the understanding that the correct response to nature is not, we can do what we want, or they have no feelings, or it doesn't matter. Whatever humans want is better. Rather that this calls us to observation, to close observation, to closer observation. It calls us to awe. When we hear a hawk as we walk up to the church, something comes over me which is like, wow, a hawk right here. Or when I go out in the garden and I see that fruits are emerging on the plants, wow, how did that happen? Because the thing is, science doesn't know everything yet. There is much that we do not understand. Been reading, dipping into a book that Annie introduced me to called The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. And in this book, Schlanger explores all the discoveries that people have been making about plants, about their capacity to perceive, to remember, to act deliberately. We have no way to explain it. They have no central nervous system, they have no brain. But it appears that plants have many capabilities. Communication with each other. Many capabilities that don't fit our human model of intelligence. And it's beginning to crack open even the plant world. I mean, we've seen in animal studies in recent years the recognition that human intelligence is not the model for the intelligence of every animal. And many animals are very intelligent without having our intelligence. So I think a little bit of humility is in order for us, too, to accept that we don't know everything yet, that there is more to learn by our capable observations like scientists make, even keeping notes about what we see or taking photographs, even waiting to see if it happens again. Because what is focused on in this chapter as a whole is the idea of an open stance toward Earth and all the beings of Earth, one that anticipates relationship, not just the kinds of relationships we have with other humans, but of course the kinds of relationships we have with our cats or dogs, the kinds of relationships that we have with plants, that we have with the sky. If we understand our paying attention as opening to a relationship, it puts us in a position not of superiority, but in a position of participation, even partnership. And I think that's where this passage is taking us. Care relationships, like we have with each other, like we have with our pets, like we have with our gardens, extend that understanding of relationship to partnership with the wider, awesome, amazing, stunning, beautiful, glorious world. Amen.